Welcome to Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg. We're here to explore the imposter syndrome that haunts creatives, delving into how it affects their lives and work. Join us as we chat with authors and artists about creativity, self-doubt, featuring imposter characters in their stories, and the occasional imposter who pops up in their day-to-day lives.
Today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming Kimberly Belle to the show. Kimberly is a USA Today and internationally best-selling author with over 1 million copies sold worldwide, with titles including The Paris Widow, The Marriage Lie, a Goodreads Choice Awards semifinalist for the Best Mystery and Thriller, and the co-authored #1 Audible original, The Young Rich Widow series. Desperate Deadly Widows, Book 2 in the Widow series, out now in Audible and coming on April 8th in paperback and ebook. Kimberly's novels have been optioned for film and television and selected by Library Reads and Amazon and Apple Book editors as Best Books of the Month, and the International Thriller Writers as a nominee for the Best Book of the Year. She divides her time between Atlanta and Amsterdam. Welcome!
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Well, we are big fans, and I'm a little intimidated because I was kind of going over your amazing bio and just all of the incredible things you do. And in addition to being a hugely best-selling novelist, you have a wonderful podcast that supports authors, both debut and recurrent authors. And I know you're very active in the thriller and author community. So we are huge fans of that. And thank you for everything you do.
Well, of course. And Greg, I didn't miss your cup. I saw your coffee cup.
Yeah. For all of our viewers out there, feast your eyes on the Killer Author Club mug. I'll be keeping myself caffeinated throughout this. Although the electricity humming around in this room probably renders the caffeine mood.
You even need it.
Not at all. But yes, let's take a moment to plug your fantastic endeavor.
Author Club.
Yes, with Kara and Heather. And you guys have been at that for some time as well. You guys are pretty well established in the podcast game.
Yeah, well, so it's really up to now, it's been a live show. We are starting our podcast this Friday, actually. So October 11th, we go live with our podcast. So by the time you guys are on our show, we will be streaming live on Tuesday nights, and then the podcast is uploaded every Friday. So, so we've been doing it now for about 2 years, and we've talk about feeling like, an imposter, talking to, like big names like Patricia Cornwell, and we're having Robert Dugoni on tonight. So, I mean, we talk to people that I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I ever measure up?
Right. But you are yourself a very decorated novelist. I mean, you're prolific. You've done, very well by any metric. So do you find it kind of, is it, intimidating? Is it like motivation to kind of be in the same virtual rooms with these people? Do you kind of like, feed off that energy? How does that work for you?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of both, I mean, you can't help but there's always a bigger fish. You can't help but, compare yourself to these people who have like done, you think you're doing all right. And then Patricia Cornwell comes in and she's like, oh, I've sold like, I don't know, 80 million copies or something. I'm like, oh my gosh, how will I ever get there? I don't know if I will. I don't think I can.
Right.
But, I mean, it's a little bit of both. And they're all so gracious. So, they're not comparing at all. But I think it's inherent in our authordom, to compare ourselves to others.
Yeah.
Maybe it's human too, probably.
Yeah, largely.
Yeah. Do you find, Kimberly, do you have imposter syndrome, specific to your career as a writer or an interviewer, or does that happen in other areas of your life as well?
Well, I mean, certainly, in my work, writing, I also co-write those books, and, my co-authors are so talented. And then we each have our, our own talents. Like Kate Holohan can hold the facts of an entire novel in her head, actually the whole series in her head. She knows exactly what's supposed to happen when, and who did it, and who said what. And I mean, she's kind of like the Rain Man. And I don't know how we would write it without her. And then Vanessa is the one who's thinking like, big stuff like, I see a yacht chase. Let's have wolves. How about wolves? Should we put some wolves in the story? And we're all like, what? But, so their talents are kind of dazzling, and I'm
Mhm.
confronted with it every day. But, I think it's also a good way when you can do it in a healthy way. And that's where I try to stay in that healthy lane is, kind of stoking my own creative fire and figuring out ways for me to, remember the details of the story better or tell a story faster or, write faster, write better, all those things.
When
Mhm.
you went in, the four of you, for this, you mentioned Vanessa and Kate, also Lane Fargo. For our listeners who aren't familiar, the Widow series, as mentioned in your bio, book 2 is out and will be coming out. You said in April, right? In
Four,
paper.
4-8.
April.
Okay.
Mhm.
Um, when the four of you went in to kind of endeavor to do this project together, did you kind of have a sense already of what each of the individual authors brought to the table, or did you really kind of find that out in real time as you jumped into the project?
We knew, well, Vanessa's the brainchild. This is her
Mhm.
brainchild. So she's the one who was behind it. And she chose us based on our writing voices. So she wanted
Mhm.
4, writers whose voices would mesh well, but be different enough, because that's important in the story that readers can tell which character is which, just kind of based on their voices, right? Especially because it was bought initially by Audible, this whole series. And so it is written and thought of as a listening story, rather than on paper. That comes later. But so she chose us based on our voices, but we really didn't know going in how we were going to work together. And we knew each other, of course. We'd all met and in person as well, but we had never worked together. So that was kind of an experiment that luckily worked out really well. And like I said, we each have our strengths and our kind of shtick when we're writing together. So that was a happy accident for sure.
I'm curious, because Greg and I write together and we have, a couple of kind of practical and technical strategies that like evolve and change throughout each book. But did you all go in, like, say, we're each going to write a character and alternate chapters? Did you follow a unified outline? What was the kind of technical approach to it?
So we had a premise and we had our 4 characters, and those were kind of the things that Vanessa came up with. And she said, and your name is Camille, and you're kind of my character is a trophy wife kind of person who's having an affair with one of the other law partners when this first story opens. But
Mhm.
everything other than that, I filled in myself.
Mhm.
And we knew that we were going to write our chapters from our different characters' perspectives and just kind of round robin our way through the story. So we knew that going in. But what we didn't know, another happy accident, is that we all 4 are very hardcore plotters.
Mhm.
I don't know how you guys do it. If you write by the seat of your pants, I would like to hear more about that because I can't imagine that that would be possible. It would take a long time to write a story, but we would, because we hammered out a plot and a pretty detailed chapter by chapter plot. And then we would have weekly discussions where we're like, okay, you pick up the story here, you carry it to here. And these are the things that have to happen in your chapter. And then you pick it up. The next one, Kate picks it up, takes it to here, then Lane picks it up, et cetera, et cetera. And so because we could do that, we were writing 4 chapters a week. We wrote that first book in like, I don't know, 8 or 9 weeks, crazy
That's incredible.
fast.
Wow.
But that's, 4 people and we were writing each 20,000 words or so. So yeah, so you can do it faster.
That's amazing. I just kind of keep thinking about, and forgive me because I'm like tapping into my witchy teenage roots and I'm writing something about witches. So it's like you guys have a coven, you have 4 writers, and you're like magic. So I'm for here on after I'm referring to you guys as the writing coven.
I
But
love it.
I'm so impressed with, like you said, there's like these 4 very distinct voices, and I can tell, you know, each character is written by a different writer in the best possible way, but then on the same token, it's seamless. The story really fits together. And then was it a surprise and unplanned that you would do a follow-up? Because I didn't think I had heard. I thought when we had Vanessa on and she talked a little bit about it, that a sequel and everything kind of beyond the Audible was like a surprise. Is that right?
Well, when we sold it, it was a one book, but as we're talking through it, because that first book kind of quickly became Kate's character's book. Justine is the name of her character. And so it kind of, I mean, it's really a book that stars all four women, but it kind of, the story revolved around Kate, and her arc was a little stronger than the others' arcs. And so when we were discussing that, we were just kind of brainstorming and chatting, and we're like, well, if Kate gets a story, then all of us get a story. So that's automatically four. And then we were like, well, the next one could be this. And that ended up as Camille, my character story. And now we're working on books 3 and 4. So the next one is Meredith's story. And then it ends with Vanessa's character, Crystal. So it's, it kind of worked out well. Another happy accident, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys are tripping over happy accidents. It's a really nice bit of work.
And speaking of the Witch's Coven, our next story, so we just spent a week plotting it out, or like 4 or 5 days plotting it out. And we did some research trips, and we ended up in Salem, Massachusetts, because that's going to be part of it. It's very witchy there. And that's where they burned the witches at the stakes. They didn't actually burn them, they hung them. But so that's going to be part of the backstory of our next book.
That's fun. Now, does that change the way you approach the process from one book to the next? If in the first book, as I said, you're writing more of a kind of a supporting arc versus writing the primary arc in book 2?
Not really. The only difference is because everybody gets, to tell the story from the way that they're seeing it. Their characters are seeing it. The only difference is the person whose book it is, or the character whose book it is, they have an extra chapter to write. They get to begin the story and close the story. So they write one extra chapter. But other than that, it's really, all 4 women featured in pretty much every chapter.
One of the things I think I've picked up as a through line with both your collaborative projects and then your solo novels is you write really interesting, strong women who end up really in these precarious or life-threatening situations, and they save themselves, which I love. It really passes the Bechdel test. Your books are not about women sitting around talking about the man. There are men and they're problematic and they create inciting incidences, but I love that. Is that conscious? Is that something you've always kind of sought out in your writing?
Yeah, it is. And it's kind of actually the stories that I tend to gravitate to when I'm reading as well. I love a romance, like everybody loves a romance. But, when it comes especially to thrillers and people in peril, characters who are in peril, I want them to be, maybe in the beginning of my stories, they don't realize that they have that kind of strength, but that's usually part of their arc, that they realize, like they can do this. They can slay their dragons, and they can figure out a way and use their brains in order to get themselves out of this awful situation. So it's the kind of books I like to read. So that's, I guess, logical that I ended up writing those kinds of characters as well.
Yeah, that makes me think about, we've had a number of authors on the show who've talked about writing characters that they didn't necessarily see in the books they grew up reading. And I'm wondering if you had that experience, or the opposite, if you read strong female characters with their own agency and that inspired you.
I'm one of those authors that, they say every author has, they come to the page with some sort of trauma that they're working through. But I'm one of those authors who had like a totally normal, happy childhood. If there's trauma there, I don't remember it. So, I don't know. I guess I kind of write to maybe because I mean, you just have to like open a newspaper or turn on the TV to see all sorts of horrible, awful things happening in the world. And I guess I write to kind of give people their own better ending, maybe,
Mm.
or to sort through the kind of horrible, awful things that I'm seeing on the screen or reading in the paper. I'm not sure I pulled anybody from my own life other than maybe some side characters.
Mm.
I don't want to get sued.
Right. Practical. Do you think that having grown up, it sounds like you had a pretty well-adjusted sort of childhood. Do you think that that maybe just engendered you with the kind of empathy that you're talking about, where you can just kind of see things in the world and then process them?
Yeah, maybe. I'm also a Pisces.
Mm.
Mhm.
That people say that helps as well. And I mean, like I had a great childhood, but of course I had friends who had it less, in their own lives or their families or whatever. So I did see it. I actually ended up when I went to college, my major was psychology. So I've
Mm.
always been kind of drawn to, putting yourself in someone else's shoes and trying to understand how that makes them feel, how that makes them act, all those things.
Mm.
Well, hard to come up with a better major to then lead you into a life of writing thriller fiction than
Yeah.
psychology. It's like right there.
Exactly, exactly. Not that I remember all those things from my college. It was a really long time ago, but yeah, it definitely helps.
I think it would be good if psychology was like an offering in, MFA programs or undergrad, if
I
you have
think
an
so
English major.
too.
I mean, I think most people should take psychology just to understand like basic
Yeah.
things.
And, even if you're not writing thrillers or villains, like, psychologically um, going there in your fiction, you still have
Yeah.
arcs. You
Yeah.
still want to like understand why people do things the way that they do them. So I agree with
Yeah.
that.
Well, and also I think one of the things about your characters, especially in the Paris Widow, is there's a lot of kind of like what lies beneath the surface, or like secrets and identities, and I want to talk about things carefully because I don't want to spoil any of the amazing twists of the book. But do you want to unpack a little bit about like writing characters who might be duplicitous or have lots of secrets?
Sure. And I tend to, you were talking before about my characters, and I tend to, not all my books, but almost all of them, I end up with a main character who's in a relationship,
Mhm.
whether it's, married, but a long term, monogamous relationship. Um, and I think, that's one of those things where even if you're not married, even if you've never been married, you can kind of put yourself in a position of what it would feel like, what it would be like if the person that you're sharing this roof and this bed with
Mhm.
suddenly decides that or suddenly reveals that they've had these secrets, whether they tell you or something happens that kind of, tips you off. And so I tend to gravitate towards that in my novels. And I think, everybody has secrets, but when they are um, big enough and they come out to someone who you thought knew you very
Mhm.
well and knew all the most important things about you, and then suddenly it comes out that you've done this or had this horrible thing in your past. um, yeah, it can be very traumatic.
Mm.
Well, you do it so well in The Paris Widow. And what I think is kind of a cool twist on this is you end up doing it over the course of the story, kind of with both of your main characters. So the reader continues to get this, you do this beautiful job of kind of teasing out these layers of at least apparent deception along the way. And you really calibrate it in such a way that you just maximize the tension. How do you kind of go into that? Do you have that lay? I know you said you are, a plotter. Do you kind of lay those little like flags out along the way? Do those develop as you get further into the character psychology as you write ahead? Like, how are you able to do that?
So when I plot out a book, it's really typically very plot heavy. I kind of know my characters beforehand. I know the big things about them, and I know also what the crime or the big bad is in the story.
Yeah.
Maybe not all the details of it, but I know that going in. But I mean, you always surprise yourself along the way as you're writing too, even when you're working from a plot, and even when you have, okay, well, this is the way the story is going to go, and then you get in there and you're like, ooh, but maybe this should happen. Or what more often happens, unfortunately, is like, oh crap, this is something I didn't see coming, and now it's not going to work, so I have to rethink this person or backstory or whatever it is. So I think it's a little bit of both. I plan as much as I can on the front end, and then once I get in there, I end up having to fix things, change things, sometimes move things around. Like in the Paris Widow, the scenes, the flashback scenes that I have, and I can't remember how many there are exactly, but maybe 7-ish. Of the vacation prior to when the story opens. So my main character, Stella, and her husband, Adam, are on vacation in Paris when the story opens, but then the flashback chapters are the weeks prior as they move around Europe. So, and in each one, I kind of give an answer to a story question that has been building in the chapters up to it. So when I was in my plot, those were from Stella's point of view. And then as I got further into the story, I was like, oh, we need to hear from Adam. We need to know what's going on in his head. So I went back and rewrote them and then kept writing them from Adam's point of view, and it worked much better. So you have to, even when you plot, I guess my point is I always make sure that I stay open so that I can change along the way.
Yeah.
You're not the first author to come on recently to talk about writing in one point of view and then realizing it doesn't work and then rewriting it and then it just kind of clicks. And I think we've had that experience too. I mean, both in like whether it's a particular character's first person or if you change it to like second or third. And I think that's so amazing that something that doesn't work in one way can then just like feel so perfect and seamless in another.
Yeah, it's weird, right? And I love it and hate it when that happens because it means rewriting, which is always a pain. But when you can make that and then like the story opens up, it's a great feeling.
Yeah, that's incredibly rewarding.
Can you talk about in the Paris Widow, you go into the world of blood antiquities, which I didn't know really anything about and is so fascinating. And I don't know about you, but I always get into rabbit holes during writing. How deep was that rabbit hole for you?
Oh my gosh, there's so much out there. There is so much. But it's after the trading of drugs and arms, I think the third largest criminal enterprise run by, organized criminals in the world. I don't remember the dollar amount, but it's gazillions, billions, super high. And they're, like I said, they call it blood antiquities also for a reason. It's, they're ripping them out of temples and ruins and historical sites, usually in war-torn countries, smuggling them over the border and selling them to the highest bidder. And often the highest bidder is, a legit buyer, like museums, galleries, private collectors who think, they want this unique piece of history, and they're willing to maybe kind of look the other way if it looks a little shady or seems a little shady. Yeah, just so that they can have it. It's crazy. And like you said, rabbit holes. I mean, there are a gazillion of those.
How did you come up with that as the husband's job? Because I think there's also, this is a question that comes up in writing is, there's a finite number of interesting careers.
Right. No joke. Yeah.
Plot. And I'm like, how have I not read 5 books about this?
Right.
Yeah, it's that fascinating. So when I pitched the story and when, I was discussing it with my editor, I pitched, I don't remember what his job was exactly, but it was something in international finance. And so it was very numbers and, moving money around. And she's like, gosh, that's so complicated and maybe a little boring. So she's like, can you come up with something else, something that would be, like a little more concrete? And so I don't remember how I came onto the antiquities thing, but as soon as I started doing research into that, I was like, oh, wow, this is it. And there are so many shenanigans and so many different ways it could carry the story. And I have a character in there, Cat, who is based on a real person. And I did a lot of, that was one of the biggest rabbit holes. His name is Arthur Brand, and he's a Dutch guy who is the real life Indiana Jones of the antique market. And he does exactly what Cat does in the story. He chases down these pieces that the world thought was lost, and returns them to the rightful owner.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you write while you were in Europe? I know you're splitting your time between Amsterdam and the States. When I was reading certain scenes, I was like, she has to be sitting in Paris right now.
That was the bonus of this book. I got to go on to all these places that I was writing about. Some of them had been like, because when you're in Europe, it's like I can go to Paris in 3 hours on the train, so it's super easy to get around. It's very affordable, the flights. So a lot of these places I went to just on normal vacation. It wasn't necessarily to do research. But then when I started thinking about it, I was like, oh, I could set a scene on that square in, I don't know, Bilbao, for example. And, so I had definitely visited all the places.
Yeah, and it makes such an indelible difference in the writing, because you really do get the texture and the way you describe smells, the way you describe sights, details of things. I mean, ornate architectural things that you pepper in like that. I mean, it really like brings you in. Is that something that you have been able to do with other books? Is that something that you want to kind of like do going forward as much as possible, to be able to really like get in and see the physical spaces as much?
Yeah, any excuse to travel the world,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. You write it off.
No, my next book, which comes out in June of next year, is called The Expat Affair, and it's set in Amsterdam. So I went
Perfect.
to town on that one. That one was the easiest to write. I was like, what does that street look like? I'll just take a walk with the dog and go check it out. So so that one's in Amsterdam. And then the one I'm kind of working on now is also international. So I really do love the extra flavor. It's kind of, for me, fits in the category of write what you know, because I do get to go back and forth so much and, spend half my life in Europe. So why couldn't I set a story there,
Right. Do you experience, as you're writing, when you're writing that immersively and you're actually spending time and breathing the air in the places, do you feel a difference in terms of when you're writing something like that versus when you need to maybe write remotely, for whatever reason? Is there like an energy or a different kind of feeling?
Not really, because I think writing is so very technical, once you get into the actual story. Like, I do feel like the places that I'm writing about, I want to have seen them with my own eyes, the real places. But I think when it's actually time to write, I just need to stare at my computer screen and and just, work it out.
Okay, got it.
It sounds like you're really prolific. Are you doing a book a year? Are you doing a book and a half a year? I mean, tell us what your output is like.
Well, I've been doing a book a year pretty much. I mean, occasionally it'll stretch to a year and a half, but that's, I think, the longest I've gone. And then on top of that, I'm doing these, co-written books, which actually I really enjoy writing those while I'm writing my solo book, because one kind of pushes the other along. Like, if I get bored of one story, I can flip to the other. I feel like, with the other authors waiting for my chapter, there's some accountability in terms of, deadlines there. And it just really, it kind of keeps me chugging along in both stories for some weird reason. So book a year, solo book a year, plus on top of that, my Young Rich Widows books, which, when it comes time to launch them, it can be a little crazy. Like last year we had the launch of I had 3 book launches last year, and all within 2 months of each other. So 2 in April and then my own in June, and it was a lot. Like I took July and August off. I was like, it's too much.
Do you enjoy the author part more or the writer part?
I think the writer part, that's not to say I don't love the author part, but I can only take the author part in short doses.
Yes.
So you guys are nodding. I think you know what I mean.
Well, three book launches in 2 months would kill me. So.
Yeah. It's a lot of being on and saying the same things over and over, which, I get it. That's part of the gig. And I love getting out and meeting readers and, talking about characters that they know and love as well. That just makes me so happy to be like, wow, they're talking about these people like they're real. They live in their head like they live in my head, and that's always such a great kick. But like I said, I can only take it in short doses, and then I need quiet time.
Yeah. The social battery is a real thing. And that being that prolific, that really has to be such an energy pull to have to do multiple things in a year. That's wild. I would love to go back. You're sort of perfect in terms of the way you, as we mentioned, write characters and all of these various layers of sort of imposterhood and deception and things like that in a lot of your books. You really are such a great fit. I'd love to go back and talk about a previous title of yours, which is the Personal Assistant. That novel explores a lot of the online world, social media, which are settings that are, of course, rife with these kind of imposters and forms of deception in a lot of different stripes. What was the subject? What about the subject for you made it such kind of fertile ground for a thriller?
I think it was something that kind of came out of the author life. I mean, you guys know, as authors, I don't want to say required to put ourselves out there, but our publishers basically are like, what's your social media, what's your following, how many people do you have? So they really want you to, do that. And so, but I have a husband, I have a family, I have kids, and they don't ask to be put out there like that always. So I'm very mindful of how I use them and, use others in my post if I put them out there like I'm putting myself out there. So it got me thinking, like, and you see it all the time too on social media, like these posts that start like a runaway train and then they lose all control and people get canceled for something that, sometimes it's very valid reasons, and other times it's like something that happens that goes completely sideways and you can't stop it. And that is terrifying, especially when your livelihood depends on, your social media. So that it kind of got the story rolling in my head. What would happen if something got out there that completely like changed the way my character is living with her family, but also maybe put her and her family in danger, because that's another real thing that happens on social media. People get doxxed, people get threatened. All you have to do is go at a comment and check out a comment section sometimes, and you're like, whoa, somebody needs to be calling the police.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you are short on thriller plot lines, all you have to do is go on social media to the comment section, or Nextdoor app is mine, because it's
that's another real one.
What people will say about their neighbors, or but yeah, I mean, I love that. I think that in all of your books, you take these kind of really interesting kernels of an idea and then build and build and build on them. And I'm wondering, because you've written so many books now, Can you take us back to like the first or before the first? Where were you in your head? Were you thinking, I want to be a full-time novelist and write a bunch of books? Were you just like, I want to write one? Who were you pre that first novel?
Yeah, I mean, writing is my second career, maybe even my third. I don't know, but I worked for many, many years in nonprofit fundraising. Really loved it. Loved what I did. Felt very, you know, glad to be there, blessed to be there. And then in 2008, I was doing consulting here in Atlanta for a bunch of different local organizations, and the crash hit. And literally overnight, all my clients went up in smoke. Like I woke up the next morning and I had no job. But I had always thought it'd be really cool to write a book. Like I might have a story to tell. And so I woke up the next morning and I was like, I could go out and find another job. I was certain I could, but maybe this is the universe giving me that nudge, this thing that I've always kind of secretly wanted to do. We were talking before about secrets, and this was kind of a secret for me, because when I said to my husband, I think I'm going to just, write a book. He was like, "What? You're going to do what? Where is this coming from?" I'd always been a reader, but I guess I'd never really voiced that I wanted to be a writer. It kind of felt so far off and so unattainable. I mean, you guys know how hard it is to write 90,000 words, and not just 90,000 words, but they have to be on the right order and they have to be the right words. And like, that's really hard. And so, I didn't really even know what kind of book I wanted to tell. It took me a while to find my voice, to find my genre, to find, what kind of what my shtick was going to be. And so, that, like I said, 2008, and then my first book came out in 2016. So it took me a minute, but I was lucky to be able to, really concentrate on that for a while and figure things out and never look back. Turns out I have more than one story to tell, thankfully.
For sure you do.
And had you been, as a reader, before that point, had you gravitated towards thrillers as a reader? Were you a broader reader? How did that influence,
I'm still a really broad reader. I mean, I'll read just about anything. I'm not huge on horror, but that's kind of it. Sci-fi, maybe not so much, but sometimes, I mean, I like time travel stories. So, I'll try just about anything. But the kind of stories that I really love are the ones where there's some suspense to them, some maybe even thrillerish, in that thrillerish territory, and really about not just what's happening in the plot, but how that makes the characters feel, and how that changes the relationships in ways that maybe they didn't see coming.
Right.
And that's I think the fun too of exploring when you're writing is like, how does this not just change their lives and put them in peril, but like, how does it change their relationships with their kids, with their husbands, partners, whatever, friends. Yeah, that's fascinating to me.
Well, it's occurring to me too, as you're kind of talking a bit about your past endeavors. Coming into it, I have to imagine that psychology background when you were first starting out must have at least helped to kind of guide the ship in that direction.
Yeah, and I think because I studied psychology and then I never practiced it, so I think it was more just maybe kind of a like subconscious thing, maybe. But yeah, I do think it has helped for sure.
Well, I'm also, something you said is like frizzing in my mind about, surprising your husband by saying, I'm going to write a book, and kind of having that inside of you and never like revealing it. And I think this is like a really common thing with writers.
Yeah.
And it strikes me as interesting. I mean, I'm biased, that writers in particular, we kind of live with this as a secret. If you want to be an actor or a musician, at some point you're going to have to audition or perform. But you could potentially
get rejected.
Exactly, right. But you could potentially write in private or secret your whole life, and people in your life could never know this is what you're doing with
Yeah.
your time.
And I bet a lot of people do.
Yeah, for sure. And I wonder what it is, for you that made you feel like this was like kind of a dream that or an aspiration that you didn't necessarily want to share. What was behind that for you?
For me, it was a lot of, and I told my husband pretty quickly, maybe like right away when I made that decision. But I didn't really go around telling everybody else because you guys know before you're published, if you tell people you're writing a book, they're like, well, when can I read it? Are you published yet?
Right.
I mean, they don't understand that there's this like a long trajectory, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint. So I really was quiet about that. And for me, it was mostly in my own head. I wanted to know for sure that I could do it before I went around telling people that I was going to do it.
Yeah.
Because it's like I said, it's really hard. And especially when you're not quite sure what kind of stories you want to tell, what genre you even want to be in. I mean, it took me a while to figure all that out. And I wasn't comfortable going around and telling people. I told kind of my close circle and then spread it out from there.
Were there points along the way in that process, if you kind of remember back to that first manuscript, were there points where you kind of hit that point of confidence, maybe like, oh, maybe I can do this, or this is starting to really feel like a story, or these characters are kind of jumping off the page and speaking to me? Like, you remember those little kind of like benchmarks as you went?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So I wrote a story. I wrote my first story, and I felt like, okay, I can do this. It's a legit story. It maybe needs a lot of work, but it's a legit story. So I definitely remember that feeling of hitting the end and feeling good about it, like being in a place where I was willing to show it to other people and start the search for an agent and all that. But for me, the real moment that I thought, oh, this is going to really be something is when I started writing The Last Breath, which was my debut novel. And as soon as I started writing that one, I was like, oh, this is going to be it. It's going to get me an agent. It's going to get me, all the things that I need. I can get a publisher with this book. It was just it's such a hooky story. And yeah, I really love the characters. I just thought it was, how you get that feeling when you're writing the book, you just know it inside. You're like, your cells hum. It's weird. I can't explain it. But then I also got a group of girlfriends, and it's kind of my husband's in an entrepreneurs group, and they have this thing called forums, and you get together with them once a month, and you talk about things that are going on in your personal life, in your relationships, and in your work. And your work can be whatever it is that you define it. So I got myself a forum, and I was like, look, girls, I wrote this book. I'm looking for an agent. You guys are going to hold me accountable. And so every month I would go, and sorry, that's my daughter beeping in. I'll tell her, she's beeping through. Every month I would go there and I would talk about, where I was in the process, how many rejection letters I'd gotten, how many people I talked to, what I was doing. And that really kind of helped not just motivate me, but, kind of push the process along. In the beginning, you're really, like you said, doing it just for yourself. But then all of a sudden I had this group that was kind of, holding me accountable to the things that I said that I was going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the second time you've mentioned accountability, both with the Widows Magic Writers Coven and then with your forum. And I think it's so wise, and in the same way that like writers groups can be so helpful in that regard. Like, again, this is such an isolating, solitary job we have, and I think any source of community and accountability and encouragement can be the difference between not just like your own personal sanity,
right,
but not giving up, because as you mentioned, rejection is such a part of creative professions. But it's so hard to get an agent. It's so hard to know how to navigate publishing, whether it's self-publishing, hybrid publishing, or traditional.
Right.
So, it is safety in numbers. And, I'm curious because you have had so many experiences publishing yourself, and then you've talked to so many accomplished writers. What are some of the, like tidbit pearls of wisdom you hold with you or you've heard that have been really helpful?
Oh gosh, so many, but I'm not sure I can come up with any right now. Let
I
me
put you on
think
the
about
spot.
that.
Sorry. We can come back to that.
Yeah, we might need to. But what I was going to say though, what you were talking about is like that's one of the beauties I think of writing together, and you probably will agree with this, is that you don't have to do it alone. And writing is typically so even when you're writing together, you have to write your chapter by yourself, right? But it's at least there's strength in numbers for sure, even if it's only to bitch and moan behind the scenes. It feels a lot less solitary.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
you certainly, you mentioned that with that first book, having, putting that forum together and having that support system built in for that. And you've certainly, I think, in the time since that, paid it forward in terms of this kind of author community we're all part of. Again, you host the interview series, which is about to be a podcast. You're very supportive and active on social media, all while writing yourself and also being an avid traveler as well. Are you? Do you feel like you've gotten into a good groove in terms of like budgeting your time and sort of being able to achieve that healthy balance with all of those things?
Yeah, so far so good. We with the Killer Author Club, the nice thing, again, safety in numbers. The nice thing is there are three of us. And so we kind of, each have our own thing that we're responsible for getting ready for the episodes. It is a lot of reading, but I do a lot of reading anyway. So I always have enjoyed that. But I've gotten to where it's kind of down to a science for sure. The only thing is when I'm in Holland, whenever the Killer Author Club, it's 3 o'clock in the middle of the
Right.
night
Oh my
that I
God.
get up, like pop out of bed and go and
That's
I don't know. I've
dedication.
figured it out. I sleep in the next morning, so it works out well. But it is. And we also have an killer assistant who does a lot of the work behind the scenes, which definitely
Yes.
helps.
Clutch.
But yeah, it's so much fun, and I hope that comes across in the episodes too. We have a blast getting to talk to all these authors and pick their brains and hear about their books and celebrate their books, and it makes this solitary thing a lot less solitary to band together.
Yes.
And also, I think if you're lucky as we are to be able to do work that doesn't really feel like work,
Yeah, that's
takes
it.
the slog out of it, maybe.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think you've hit on it. It doesn't feel like work. Reading never has felt like work. Getting to talk, you know, with other authors doesn't feel like work. And also, this kind of goes back to what I was talking about with the personal assistant. We're required to be on socials anyway and shouting out about the work that we're doing. And this is a way to kind of put myself out there that supports other authors, but also isn't just screaming, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. It's by promoting other authors, you're also kind of sort of promoting yourself. You're getting other eyes on you that maybe otherwise wouldn't be on you. And so I kind of see it as a win-win.
Yeah. That's a great point. No, I have learned about so many books that I might not normally have known about,
Right?
because other people I follow have recommended great stuff, dependently. And I also really appreciate seeing other authors recommending books and authors that they love, just because I think, to your point, it's, all boats will rise,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I
Agreed.
um, and I have found that, both online and then in person. I think Greg and I have said a bunch of times, like here on this podcast, and then just when we're out in the world, that the thriller community in particular is so supportive. And, I have yet to find a genre community that's not supportive. That's the one I know. So,
Yeah, agreed.
so
They're amazing.
yeah.
And everybody we've all been there, right? We've all been in that place where you're just starting out and trying to, make friends and find your people online. And
Yeah.
everybody's so welcoming and happy to pass it forward. So,
Right. Well, so as far as the real world, have you had any experiences with imposters?
I have, unfortunately.
Oh, tell us.
Yeah, so this was a couple years ago. I was sitting at home on the couch, and all of a sudden my phone starts blowing up with these messages from Bloomingdale's. Thank you for your purchase. Thank you for your purchase. I'm like, oh, somebody's going to town with my Bloomie's credit card. So I call, cancel the card, get a new card, and I'm like, that's that. Like a week or two later, I get a call from Enterprise, the car rental agency, and they're like, "Hey, when are you bringing back the Escalade?" I'm like, "Excuse me, what?" So this girl who had my Bloomie's card, not just my Bloomie's card, she had another credit card in my name, a Visa or MasterCard. Plus, she had a driver's license in my name, which was the thing that really kind of freaked me out. So then all of a sudden it went from, this cute, funny little haha story to like serious, like attorneys got involved. I don't know if you guys have ever had your identity thefted,
No.
but
No.
it is no fun. It is no fun at all. It was a pain in the butt. Like I said, attorneys, I think I'm banned for life at Enterprise because try explaining, no, that wasn't me. It was somebody else who was posing as me.
Oh my gosh.
And I've since locked down my credit, but still, it was interesting. The good news is this girl's in jail until like 2030 something, because not just my identity she stole, but like she had a whole stall of people that she was just buying stuff, renting cars, stealing,
Oh my God.
going to town with their credit cards.
Did we ever get confirmation on the ultimate fate of the Escalade?
I don't know what happened to that car. Okay. I don't know. Okay. Should I write her in jail?
I mean, this could be the start of a new novel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's this identity. There's this car floating around somewhere in the ether off of this identity theft. I mean, you could take that in so many directions.
Exactly.
I mean, and we're laughing, but I know identity theft is a really serious thing. And I'm sorry that this happened to you. And I'm also just wondering, how did she get all of your stuff? Was this like dark web? Someone had all your information?
I don't know. I mean, it could be. It could have been from that. I just don't know how she got it.
Wow.
But she got the important stuff. So my information is definitely floating out somewhere in the ether.
Wow.
Don't look for me.
We will not.
Well, it's locked down now. Nobody can get a credit card in my name.
Well, there was just that whole thing. I did the same thing recently because of that whole Social Security breach where they got like tens of millions, I think, of Social Security numbers. So
I think by now pretty much everybody who has any sort of information at all is out there.
Right.
Mm-hmm. By now there have been so many breaches.
Right. Yeah. The digital world that we live in is sort of just rife with that at this point. It's kind of unavoidable. Yeah.
Well, so my question for you on this, and I know we're short on time, but I'm curious, as a multi-book thriller writer, and you're well-versed in writing about shady characters, did you feel surprised, violated, or were you just like, yeah, this is about right?
Kind of the last one. I was like, by then, I mean, it wasn't that long ago. It was probably pre-COVID for sure. But, by then it was happening all around. I'd heard so many stories of other people who'd had, their identity stolen. And so I was like, I guess it's my turn at some point.
It's like jury duty, right? Like we just got to kind of.
Yeah, you just got to
get through it.
Just get it done.
Yeah. This is it. Well, again, Kim, this has been great. Thank you for spending your time with us. We've had a magical hour. We would love to, as prolific as you are, please shout about, any projects coming up that you want eyeballs on.
Yeah, just the Desperate Deadly Widows in paperback and ebook coming in April, and then we at some point we'll be coming out with news for book 3 in that series. Yeah, so we're busy writing it now. So
amazing. And where can our listeners find you on the internet? Speaking of social media,
on all the socials, finding me in wasting entirely too much time on all of them. Unfortunately or fortunately, I'm on Facebook and Instagram probably the most.
Okay.
All the links to everything are at Kimberly Belle Books, my website.
Perfect.
Great. And your guys' podcast, by the time this airs, will be up and probably multiple episodes available. So
yeah, and
congratulations.
you can find all the links to that at killerauthorclub.com.
Perfect.
Amazing.
All right. Well,
thanks again.
Yeah, thank you for spending your time. Listeners and viewers, you have plenty to deep dive into from the genius mind of Kimberly Belle. Thank you again for spending your time with us. And we'll talk again soon.
Well, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right. Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg is created and hosted by us, Elizabeth Keenan and Greg Wands. The show is produced and edited by Bookwild Collective founder Kate Herget. Scott Leeds composed our original theme music, and Steve Luoma designed our logo. You can find us on IG at Imposter Hour Podcast and online at imposterhour.com.